My name is Ilya Zaslavsky. I'm from San Diego Supercomputer Center, and I have very personal, deep appreciation for the work you do, because actually yesterday I was showing a demo of how we connect to SDG indicators that are assembled by the National Statistical Commission and bring them into a visualization application. But beyond that project, this is a lot of foundational methodological and data collection effort that goes into this very important work, and I'm happy to introduce Jillian Campbell, who will be running this panel. A few words about, she leads UN Environment's work on SDG indicators, and that includes development of methodologies for Tier 3 indicators and managing data reporting for Tiers 1 and 2. And she does a lot of work on methodology for data collection and consensus building and reconciliation of different things. Now it's to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the idea of this session really is just to have a discussion from our behalf, on UN Environment's part. We have been working on a number of the SDG indicators, and there are a lot of Tier 3 indicators, but also for the Tier 2 indicators we still have capacity gaps. And this is really, in terms of monitoring the environment, a huge gap. And so I tried to bring together a range of different people for this panel that have a lot of expertise on building capacity, on developing methodologies, on promoting the use of methodologies. And so I'm hoping we can just have a frank discussion. So I'll start the discussion off by asking some questions and introducing the panel. But please feel free to ask anything that you want to ask, and let us know your views also. So the first person on the panel is the co-chair of the IAG SDG. This stands for the Interagency and Expert Group on the SDG indicators. He also, of course, has a day job, which is with INEGI. This is the National Statistical Office of Mexico. And so probably a lot of you have seen him on previous panels. And his name is Enrique. And then our next panelist is Pali. Pali has been a champion for statistics for a decade at least. He obviously sort of kicked off
2 decades.
Yeah, there you go. 2 decades. He kicked off the World Data Forum a few years ago, and he is, a well-known face in this area, and he's been a champion for statistics not only in his own country, which is South Africa, but in Africa and across the world. Then our next panelist is Annie. Annie works with UNDP, and she has been involved in an initiative called the Biodiversity Lab. So if you were here this morning, then you would have seen her presenting all the very interesting work that they're doing on trying to not only bring geospatial data together, but also really to promote the use of that data for decision making. And now our last two, we have Oliver. Oliver works at Stats Luxembourg, and he is also the chair of the UNECE, this is the Economic Commission for Europe, Task Force on Climate-Related Statistics, which this is a big initiative to try to better understand climate change, which is a bit of a gap in the SDG framework. And then on the far end, we have Gemma. Gemma is the head of statistics, or chief, or I'm not sure, for the UN SCAP. So this is the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Prior to that, she was with the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and she also has a long history of championing statistics. So I'll start by then starting the discussion off. So I wanted to first ask Enrique a question, as he is the co-chair of the IAG SDG. We have so many of the indicators in the SDG framework that are still Tier 3, and particularly environmental indicators that are Tier 3. And as you know, there's a lot of work going on trying to upgrade these statistics, but many of them are still not upgraded, and we kind of get the feeling that we're running out of time, and a lot of countries are already going forward with what they do have. And so my question for you is, are we too late? Or to put it in a better light, what are the opportunities to really promote the inclusion of these tier 3 indicators in still monitoring development?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this panel. Well, yes, we have, as you know, the global indicator.
And we have people on the WebEx too, so we had to make sure that we...
I think it's working now. So, I was saying, yes, the global indicator framework consists of 232 indicators that were approved by the Statistical Commission and then endorsed by the General Assembly last year. And of those, we have still 57 which are indicators tier 3. I suppose we all know what that means, that we don't have international standard and methodology approved. We have a plan for tier 3 indicators, and the agencies are working very hard to develop methodologies. They are piloting, they are testing, they are proposing definitions and sets of data to several countries. As you have said, many countries have already begun to do some of the work on tier 3 indicators. We have done so. We have several of those indicators. In particular, for goal 13, goal 14 on the oceans, and 15 on biodiversity, we have, altogether we have 32 indicators, of which we have 11 which are tier 1, 9 are tier 2, but still we have 10 indicators which are tier 3. So that raises concern, as you have said. And last March, at the meeting of the Statistical Commission, there was a mandate for the IAG to look into the possibility of developing proxy indicators for those tier 3, for which we don't have yet plans. So we have our next meeting in Sweden beginning November 5th. And one of the items on the agenda will be how we develop proxy indicators for those which have not yet made strong progress in developing methodologies. So, in the case of many of these environmental indicators, geospatial information is basic, and we need a stronger collaboration between statistics offices, national statistical offices, and geospatial or mapping agencies from the countries. Not all of the countries have the case as we do in Mexico, where we are under one roof, and even so it's not so easy. We have to learn how to communicate, and as I was saying last 2 days ago, we need to improve our interoperability. In Mexico, we are developing an interoperability model to use geospatial information along with the statistical information, not just for disseminating the data, but also as input to develop data and indicators. So the challenge is strong, but I think that partnership is key, and involvement of not only official spatial producers and official statistical producers is necessary, but also other actors.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, Mexico is doing amazing things, and I think that all of us can sort of learn from this opportunity. I'm going to ask sort of a similar question to Gemma. You know, SCAP recently did this study, and I can't read my own writing, but I think it was called Measuring SDG Progress in Asia and the Pacific. Is there enough data? And this was a report that was done last year. And they found that for 61% of the environment, well, they had marked these SDG indicators as environmental, and they said for 61% of those that they have classified as environmental, There's no data at all. For another 20%, there's not enough for time series analysis in Asia and the Pacific. So this leaves a pretty small number where you actually know what's going on. And so as a regional body, I mean, Enrique talked about partnerships, as a regional body, how can this be turned around? How can we elevate the whole region?
Thank you very much, Jillian, and thank you very much to Eye on Earth for inviting me here today. So about 12, 13 years ago, I was responsible for environment statistics at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and at the time, we talked about the different domains of statistics, and we said economic statistics was like gold, social statistics was silver, environment statistics was bronze. Actually, there was also a tin, societal, SDGs 16, governance statistics is around tin. So even though the picture in Asia Pacific is not very good there, as Jillian says, I think we need to recognise that this is still a very new area of statistics and lots going on. And as Jillian mentioned, when we try to bring together a regional picture across the 58 countries based in Asia and the Pacific, the situation of trying to get some comparable data across countries is quite difficult. Now, this isn't just because we have small national statistical systems like Vanuatu, Tuvalu, Nauru, like 11,000 people. It's quite challenging to produce statistics. We also have very big countries like China, Russia, Bangladesh, and so on. So we have big statistical systems, small statistical systems, and the challenge here is across all of them. And I think what I want to say here is that developing the indicators is a long-term process, and it's a process that brings with the role of the National Stats Office and the infrastructure that they create. But what we're seeing now is that through good stakeholder mechanisms, we're getting priority setting for this area of the environment, we're developing good quality assurance process, and in particular, we're getting some good data sharing mechanisms happening. So in the SCAP region, the Asia Pacific region, we have a particular focus on producing environment statistics through the system of environmental economic accounting. This is it's fairly new environmental accounting framework compared to the system of national accounts, but it's still a well-established framework. What it does is it brings together the data producers, the data providers, the data users, and brings together data that does exist, be it biophysical data, economic data, social data, into these integrated accounts. We've been working with countries like Nepal, Fiji and Samoa to produce these accounts in the area of land, water accounts, energy accounts, waste accounts, and they couldn't be produced by the National Stats Offices alone. We're also working with another 12 countries in our region who are in various stages of developing these accounts. And the stakeholder mechanisms that we're producing are very good. So I want to keep stressing this stakeholder engagement. So the Agenda 2030 is about a country-led process. What has the country got? National priorities, national needs. And so by working directly with the countries, Nepal, Fiji, Samoa, these 12 other countries, will put in place enduring systems, statistical infrastructure, skills, processes to develop these accounts. The dynamic is changing though, and the results aren't instantaneous. We have countries in our region who are coming to workshops on environment statistics. The enthusiasm out there is really fantastic to see. We're getting many countries coming to us to say, can you please come and help us? We try and help maintain that momentum by providing remote and direct in-country technical assistance. The SDG progress report that Jillian mentioned there is like an advocacy piece. Not only does it present progress, but it highlights where we need to continue to make progress, particularly at a coherent regional level. So we have basic stats, water, energy, waste, land accounts, and we're improving this data at the country level, and then bringing it up at the regional level all the time. So I might just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to say I think that publication is great for advocacy. I mean, we use it also because it does highlight this extreme gap. And I'm glad that you also mentioned the system of environmental economic accounting, because this underlines a lot of the SDG indicators. However, if you happen to be here this morning, we did have a session on the SIA, and during the first presentation, they showed a map of where there are SIA accounts. And I would say there's definitely see it counts more and more. However, Africa was a pretty big gap, with the exception of South Africa. There was a lot of gray on the map, which was nothing. And so, Pali, I mean, I would like to ask you, from your experience in South Africa in terms of elevating that statistical system, how can this be applied more across Africa and throughout the sort of least developed countries and the developing countries that are just getting their statistical system in a position where it can start to do something like this?
Thanks, Jillian. I mean, getting statistic systems to function is very, very difficult within nations, but to try and get systems that are geometrically variable and contiguous across space even get more complicated, because what we are talking about on environmental statistics, they don't know boundaries. They don't respect any sovereigns. They don't have a sovereign state. So it gets even more difficult. So that's the case in Africa, where vast trenches of land show empty knowledge around what is happening on the ground. But of course, you've got to start at the national level in terms of just making policymakers aware about the importance of environmental statistics. But more importantly, the international systems and international standards. And in this regard, if you look at fundamental principles, particularly 8, 9, and 10, which look at international collaboration, that's a very useful and helpful infrastructure to inspire countries, and we need to cling to that. And that's what helped us in South Africa, because I mean, we were almost the last to be independent in the world, and yet we made major strides forward. And for that, we leaned very heavily on countries like Sweden, got a lot of assistance from retired people from Statistics Canada, and that helped us to really put on the table this infrastructure. Of course, the ground has to be fertile in the country. And coming to environmental statistics and looking at remote sensing and the like, it makes those gaps very, very dramatically visible in countries such as the DRC. And these numbers are about people. You've got to think about the war in the DRC and the environmental effects of pillaging the minerals in the DRC. And that really raises the agenda. And when it's visible in that kind of situation, where people are suffering as a consequence of fights over minerals, I think it raises the agenda very, very classical, and this remote sensing and the like makes this much more visible. So in good part, I think the geospatial is a catalyst for action and a catalyst for change. And I said it this morning that I think now that we have the second World Data Forum, having had the first one and having defined what data revolution is about, which is the unification of statistics and geo, maybe it's time that we think about the commission, statistical commission, as a unifying system. And when you unify it, it can't be statistical commission alone. It has to be a commission of sorts. So in terms of addressing the African problems, that unification at the global level is so essential to catalyze what will happen in the country.
Thank you for that. I think, I mean, you're exactly right. People do sometimes deprioritize the environment, but the environment we depend on for everything. And, you know, somebody quoted this "debt is the new oil" phrase yesterday or the day before. And that is a interesting phrase, and I mean, there's a lot of value to data. I think the same publication, before the data is the new oil, also said water is the new oil. And this one maybe is even more pronounced in the world today. So I think it was The Economist that said both. I'd have to double check. And so we do need geospatial information on where these resources are and where our water is. And we don't only need geospatial information, but we need to know how to use it. Which brings me to my question for Annie. I know that you have been doing a lot to try to improve the use of geospatial information. And I'm wondering if you can tell us what we can do to encourage more use of this information and use of the information for actually SDG monitoring and for creating policy action, not just monitoring for the sake of monitoring.
Yeah, great, thank you. So I think I'm the lone outlier on this panel who's not a statistician. I work with UNDP, so we're really interested in getting data to policymakers to make action. A lot of people who are in this room were here this morning for our talk on the UN Biodiversity Lab. But essentially what we're trying to do with this platform is provide spatial information to policymakers to support their commitments to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So this is a very specific niche audience we're working with here, but a lot of the insights I think we're coming across apply to the broader area of SDG monitoring, particularly the nature-based SDGs. So before we even created this platform, our main question was how much is spatial data being used in national reporting and national planning for conservation. So we did a scan of all of the national biodiversity plans and reports, and we found that on average in a national biodiversity plan, there's 4 maps. One is the country boundary, and that only 20% of the maps are actually actionable, so people can pinpoint areas to set aside for protection or to target for restoration. So at least in the case of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the spatial data that's being generated that we've heard all about for the past few days isn't making it into the key policy documents. So our next step was to try to figure out why. So we did a large needs assessment survey of the countries we work with. So in partnership with UN Environment, we work with 140 countries on their commitments to the convention. And we got back over 50 responses from 42 different countries, specifically on their needs and their use of spatial data. So what's interesting here is that the responses we got back, 88% of the groups actually had a GIS lab or organization in their country, but they said 82% cited that they have a high need for land, resource, and human footprint data. 73% cited that they have a high need for basic socio-demographic data, and 50% have a high need for land cover and biogeographic data. So a lot of that data is out there. It's just not getting to the people who need to use it for these key policy decisions. So we asked a lot of questions around these areas in terms of the types of data that they needed and wanted, what they would prioritize, and if they had it, where the key breaks in the system were. So I think most relevant for this discussion is where those barriers were. So out of the countries we surveyed, 67% said they had technical issues. They didn't have the in-country technical capacity to access and analyze the data. So that's a big one, and can be addressed through a variety of mechanisms, which we could talk about for a long time. But the second area is institutional. So this gets at what a few of the other panelists have mentioned, that a lot of times the various ministries or agencies in the country aren't talking to each other. So we work directly with Ministry of Environment, but the National Statistics Offices clearly have a lot of data that is maybe very relevant to the work that we're doing, but it's just not making it to the right people. So those kind of institutional silos in terms of policy and in terms of data was a really big one. And then the biggest barrier was financial. So all of the countries we talked to, 84%, not all, close, not quite, said that they faced constraints in accessing financial resources to access and use this type of spatial data for their conservation action. So one final point that was really interesting to us from this survey is we had a long list of areas that countries could check about what were their main limitations around accessing and using spatial data. And the top response came back as financial, they needed funding. There wasn't enough finance in it. But they also highlighted the fact that a lot of these global spatial data layers are too coarse in resolution. For some of these smaller countries, they really need finer scale data to be able to make the key decisions for actually implementing conservation plans. Another one that came back is that a lot of these global data sources and all of this big data we're seeing that has such powerful implications for conservation and development, it's not official data. So it can't be used in some of these official reports, it can't be used in some of these official plans. And that varies country by country, but trying to find a way to get it into official systems so it can actually be used by the government is really, really key, at least for the group that we're working with. A few of the other points are absence of resources, whether financial, human, or technical, and the expensive nature of ground truth in some of the global data sets, so actually going to see if what this data is showing is real on the ground. So that's kind of a brief summary of what we got back from the countries that we're working with, and it is conservation specific, but has a lot of direct implications for the Sustainable Development Agenda as well.
It is, and it's really, really interesting. I mean, you highlight the financial issues, and so far we have been talking about trying to monitor the SDGs, and there's a huge investment that will have to happen for that, and then there's an additional investment that has to happen to make some of these conservation decisions. And as I mentioned in the beginning, climate change is still not very well captured, which will also take additional investment. And so this brings me to a question for you, Oliver, which is, you know, through this task force, you have developed this core set of climate-related indicators that you think are necessary for monitoring climate change or climate-related statistics. And I'm wondering, you know, what have been the challenges with this, and how can we expand this experience beyond Europe to the countries that really are struggling to even monitor, you know, sort of the tier 0 SDGs, if I can, the top level.
Yeah, thank you for this question. If you have a look at the SDG 30, who must deal with climate change, in the global stats of indicator, you have 7 indicators proposed. But if you have a look on this indicator, we could consider that 6 of this indicator is out of scope of statistics and official statistics. And you could imagine that for a statistician, it's not sufficient. Exactly. So what we have done in UNAC Conference of European Statisticians, we decided to work on these topics, in fact. And first, we started 6 years ago. We decided to first create a task force to define exactly the coverage of the topic, because our aim is not to talk about climate change statistics, but we want to talk about climate change related statistics. There is a difference, of course. For climate change statistics, we talk about air emissions, air temperature, sea level, and so on. But in our case, we are more interested to know the impact of climate change, to know the driver of the climate change, to also have information of the response, for example, mitigation or adaptations. So this was the task of the first task force, to define the border of the topics, and also to make some recommendation how we could develop more climate change related statistics. And we developed different tools for country to give some priorities in which area they need to work. And then we published guidelines, and it was adopted by the plenary session of the Conference of European Statistics. But after that, we decided to continue the work, in fact, to help country to implement this recommendation, and then we install a steering group for 5 years. And in steering group, we decided to create a second task force working on climate change related indicator. Propose clearly indicator and methodology to calculate new indicators in these topics. And then I must say that to choose this indicator, this is a list of 39 indicators for the key indicators. We make a survey because we want that this indicator answer to questions from decision makers. So we make a survey to politicians, to decision makers, to know which kind of question do you want that we respond in terms of with our statistics. And then we obtain a good answer to this survey, and we can give priority and select really what we think are the best and the key indicator. And for this key indicator, we discuss between different experts at national level and international level to create metadata sheets where clearly we present the indicator, name, classification, unit, definition, relevance, policy relevance, link with SDGs, and this is in this case in our 39 indicator we could make link with 12 already existing indicator in the global set. And of course we discuss a lot of methodology, how to compare this indicator, and also border case. For example, if you talk about air emissions or greenhouse gas emissions more specifically, you could use different sources to calculate this indicator. For example, you can use greenhouse gas inventories, but you could also use air emission accounts. But of course, there is a difference if you use one or other of those based on territorial principle or residential principle. This is what we call dual indicator, and we work a lot of this to clearly explain the difference and also propose bridge from one indicator to another. Besides this key indicator, we also propose other indicator, operational indicator, because our aim is not just to have a picture of the situation, but also give information to decision maker to make analysis and take measure. So we propose some operational indicators, that means disaggregation of the key indicator, but also contextual indicator. And for all these indicators, we propose methodology in our metadata sheet. I think that this is this metadata sheet, how we could broaden this work of Europe concerning new questions. And we already have two good examples. This is, for example, in ESCOA. They make a survey in 2017 for participants in this group to choose some indicator on climate change related indicator. And of course, they don't use not our whole list of indicators. They make selection. Sometimes they change indicators. For example, they add an indicator on desertification. But at the end, they use our methodology to calculate this indicator. This is one example, and another example that I want to mention is that, of course, we present our list of indicators in the 37th session of Statistical Commission at UN level. And then conclusion of this discussion was that it's necessary to develop a global set of indicators at UN level. And this work is ongoing, and I will stop now.
Thank you so much. I think that it raises the very strong importance of being able to customize things at the regional and the national level to do what makes sense. And what you've done in Europe is a great example, and then it obviously needs to be customized a little bit different in different places, but you have the basic framework to start. So I'm going to ask a few more questions, but I would ask if everyone can be brief so that it's not just my questions. And so I'm going to switch back to some of the points that were made by Annie in terms of the need to really use more geospatial information. And I would like to ask Enrique, I mean, in your experience, you're in a situation where the geospatial information is co-located with statistics. And I'm wondering if you can share your views on how this has really helped you in terms of measuring the environment and some of the lessons learned from your case.
Thank you for the question. Well, just as Pali was saying that there is a need for fertile ground, you said. I think that we have that because from the statistics law, well, actually it's not statistics law, it's a statistics and geographical information law. It establishes the mandate to have these two production bodies under one roof. Of course, that's a plus. It helps us to embark in different projects. For example, we have been participating in this task force of UNECE on related climate change related indicators. But that's not enough. We have had to invest very heavily in technological resources because we need to increase our storage capacity. We need to find the best people with the right profiles, and that's evolving very quickly. So at one time, let's say 20 years ago, because I am also old, most of the people in the geographical area were like the old-fashioned people, and then all this technological wave came, and people were not prepared. So one challenge was how to replace that staff with new persons that were able to manage and to handle the new technologies and to have a look and fresh approach. One example is that people wanted to do much of the work on the field, and then taking photographs, and then came the satellite images, and then people didn't really adjust very quickly. So having everything under one agency is not enough. There are resources that need to be invested. Also, as I said before, we need partnerships. We need to partner with the academic sector, with private enterprises, with the international community, and to bring all the knowledge and the expertise together and to get the most out of it. Also, I said before, we need to develop an interoperability, not just data interoperability, but I was talking the other day about organizational or institutional interoperability, semantic interoperability, and so on, that in such a way that we really connect and can start to speak the same language. We have used our geospatial information and statistical information to produce some of the indicators, as I said, 1911, and then we have another one for the degradation of land and so others. And one final point is that we have, from July of this year, come to an agreement with Australia Geoscience to help us build an open data cube so that we can process imagery. And in particular, we have several examples on water bodies. We were speaking about water.
Yeah.
And we have a software from Australia which is called WOFS, Water Observation from Space. That's it, yes. And we are working on that. That would increase our capacity and the potential of using all of the data available. But at the same time, speaking with people conducting statistics. So it is really a good advantage.
Thank you. I mean, it's really amazing what Mexico is doing. I would like to say you are one of the sort of the more advanced statistical systems. And I want to come to Gemma because in your region, you mentioned sort of the diversity of the region. You do. You have some of these really advanced statistical systems, and then you have some in the middle, and then you have some of the least developed statistical systems in the world. And I'm wondering, where do you see the opportunities to use these big data sources that were just mentioned, satellite data, other forms of Earth observation, to sort of get everyone on the board?
Thanks very much, Jillian. So I'd just like to make a few comments on this one. We do have a big diversity in our region, but actually the opportunities are really great. For many of the statistical systems in Asia and the Pacific, there's one country who's never even run an economic census. So think about that in the concept of environment statistics. So for many countries in the region, we're going from nothing to something. So we can really leapfrog and learn from a lot of the countries who've got something. So for countries in our region, we're not going through a change process, we're going through a sort of a binary process of 0 to something. So we can actually learn from countries like Enegi and Mexico. So to me, the opportunities for spatial and big data in providing support is great. We do need to be careful here. It's not as simple as it sounds. And many of the global spatial data products need quite a lot of substantial validation to be used at the country level. So things like these data cubes and the geoscience community who are building them are really doing us a great favour because they're doing a lot of the translation of the data, fixing up a lot of the time dimensions, the pixels and all the other work that needs to be going on there. But it's a great partnership with the statistical community because it's very easy to misclassify, for instance, grasslands as agricultural areas or shrublands as forests. And we're seeing, though, that even in the smallest countries, they have some capacity within the government, maybe not even within the National Stats Office, but they have some capacity to critically assess and apply global spatial data. And let me explain here the partnership you can have with the Stats Office around censuses. So agriculture censuses can be used to ground truth the geospatial data or provide the benchmark. The population census is an opportunity to ground truth the census. The economic census is actually an opportunity to ground truth data. So this is a really great partnership between get your geospatial data, your satellite data, and then ground truth it with these massive undertakings that are going on around censuses. The other thing that SCAP's promoting is the concept of a core set of global statistics using standard classifications that the international community could make available for free or at low cost. Let me just say that again, not in such a long way. We're trying to promote the concept of a core set of global statistics. So this is really important here for climate change or climate-related statistics, disaster-related statistics. What is the killer statistic, the key statistic we need there? So if I go and talk to the economic statistics group, they'll say I need GDP. If I go and talk to the demographers, they say I need a population count. What's your killer statistic in the environment space? What's the killer statistic in the environment space? Before I break it down to what's the killer statistic in the water, for oceans, for land. We need to get this message out there that it's too many, is it, there's so many numbers out there. No wonder the users are confused. We're confusing them by putting too many out there. So in the economic world, we have a killer GDP. You then break it down to labour force, unemployment, CPI, and so on. So please, environment people, give us the best killer statistic for the environment as a whole before you start looking at sectors like water, oceans, land, and whatever. So we're promoting this concept of a core set of global statistics. I don't need 100, maybe, 5, something like that. Land cover is very important and a feasible one. And this is something that we're working through the system environmental account classification as a starting point for this. Land cover seems to be, these can be proxy, like GDP is a proxy. It's a proxy for well-being. We don't need to have a debate on whether it actually measures well-being, but it's a proxy. So let's think about land cover. It's an important and feasible one. This is also very relevant to our work in Asia and the Pacific. We're leading some work on ocean accounts. There's a lot of ocean out there. And we're working very closely with the Environmental Accounts group around ocean accounts, where there is definitely a plethora of non-standard data sources and very little guidance on what to use and how to integrate them. But it's something that I think needs some attention on this and has the potential to bring it back to this use of big data. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree. We do probably need both dashboards and some killer statistics. And I have one that I think is sort of a killer one, which is the domestic material consumption or the material footprint. I mean, this to me, it's a great one that we could adopt as one of these top tier GDP-like type of things. And I would say though that there's not a lot of experience with the material flow accounts or with things like environmental protection expenditure. However, Europe has a lot of experiences, and so I'm wondering, from the Stats Luxembourg side, I mean, you've been doing these for a while, and Gemma mentioned leapfrogging, and I'm going to say the same thing. How can we use the experiences that a country like you has, or you even as a country, and apply them to bring everybody up to that same level?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And it's very me to say that before to have the SDGs indicator or the top key indicator, you need other things. You need data, you need environmental data, and you need also to organize this data, for example, in a framework like the system of economic and environmental account. And I think that is on equal level, because you could find indicator in data or in the organization of this account. And it's very important, I think, that first to start with this level. Of course, to collect the data and to construct an environmental account, you have so many exchange between countries, or it's experience from Europe, in fact, because to develop an environmental account, you start first to contact academy and university to develop new methods and to validate the methods. Then after that, this is the second step, we discuss between countries to obtain harmonized methods that we could apply all in Europe, and then to have comparability in terms of spatial aspect or timely aspect. And then we have the publication, and we try to promote these methods. And this classic way is that an international agency like UNSD for the SDGs or the World Bank for the WAVES project try to promote this methodology and organize some training for 3 or 5 days. But I think it's not the best solution, you know, because you only have an introduction in this application of the methodology and the system. When you come back in your country, you are alone. Perhaps during the coffee break, you have the chance to have a card of an expert where you could send an email, but it's just an email, you know, it's not more. And that's why I want to share you our experience in Luxembourg. We start a cooperation project with LAUPDR, Lausch Statistical Bureau, ask us to help them to develop environmental statistics in their office. And so we try to inventory the existing data, we collect the data with them, we evaluate the quality, and also we propose to develop environmental account. And so we make a meeting in August, and not only with the Statistical Institute, but also with all ministry. And we ask this proposal, okay, pick up one account, and we will help you to develop this account. And so we received proposal, and this is a 3 years project. We will continue to help them, and we integrate also private partners to find experts and to manage all these activities. And we include in this project some midterm training, I would say. That means that we decide to invite one person in our office during 3 months and to work on the topic. So it's better that a short training where you work on theoretical exercise. Here in this case, they really work on our data, on their data, and there is exchange daily with our experts to try to construct better knowledge in this traineeship.
I think this really is important. I mean, capacity building has to be a long-term, day in, day out type of initiative, not a fly-in, fly-out type of initiative. So I think that's an excellent point. You also mentioned, I mean, the focusing on the underlying data sources, which to me comes back to the finance issue. It's expensive to collect data, and for a lot of the work we're proposing, it would be expensive. And so I wanted to ask Amy, where do you think are opportunities for us to use citizen science data or data coming from people to maybe fill some of these data gaps that we have?
Yeah, great, thank you. So I think citizen science and participatory mapping, these are areas that are so exciting and there's so much going on right now. So I am by no means an expert in any of them. There are so many experts that are here today, but I just wanted to reflect a little bit on some of the really cool initiatives that I've seen here and previously. And in general, I think all of these really offer a potential to scale up and scale out our efforts towards the SDGs. Because, I mean, the SDGs at core, the 2030 Agenda is the proposition that this shouldn't rest on governments alone, that we need private sector, we need civil society, we need community engagement. So I think there's kind of two realms here that are really interesting and important. The first is around data generation. And so a few of the other panelists referenced that official statistics are static. They're taken at one point in time. We might have multiple time points, but we don't have real-time information. And citizen science offers us a way to really provide that real-time information and basically indices of how conditions are actually changing on the ground. And if these are used in the right way, they can also be used with algorithms to predict what will happen next, where we need to be taking action, and help to guide various forms of action, whether it's entrepreneurial action, whether it's policy action, whether it's community action at the local level. So that ability to really provide real-time updates, I mean, we see this in disaster relief areas, we see it with various environmental conditions. It's incredibly powerful. And the second area that I want to highlight a little bit is around community empowerment, which we see a lot with participatory mapping. So one of the initiatives that I heard about this week is doing this amazing work in Mexico. It's a company called Sinampa, and they're working to create what they call an environmental justice index. So they're working on participatory mapping for communities who are affected by environmental issues. So they're working in the Yucatan to document impacts of pesticide use on local bee populations and local honey production. They're working to show how mining is impacting river health and coastal ecosystem health, as well as human health. And they're also showing how oil and gas exploitation is affecting local biodiversity. So because the community is sourcing the data themselves, it's all of these data points in real time showing how conditions are changing on the ground. And their idea with this is that they're not only showing this data, but they're developing predictive algorithms to show where there'll be hotspots for environmental justice issues. So in this way, they can really mobilize community members, and they can also mobilize other NGOs, the press, to really focus in on these key issues that are at the intersection of human well-being and environment. So this ability to really mobilize other actors outside of government to take action for communities, but also for environment, is powerful. And then one final last little point is the question of how citizen science can and should be integrated into some of these more formal government processes. And I think if it can, one of the key areas is around transparency and methodology, figuring out how it can be integrated as one of many data points, and how it can be vetted by governments to serve, to actually fit in with these more formal methods of data collection. And that is not my area of expertise, but maybe some of my other panel members might have thoughts on that.
Thank you. I mean, this is the question that I'm going to ask next also, and my last question. So, Pali, I think you said you'd been now working in statistics for a century, right?
Okay, that's what we did.
So in your long experience, I mean, we have this discussion, what should be the boundaries of official statistics? How do we make something official if it comes from non-official sources? And where do we define those boundaries so that we can maintain the integrity of the statistical system, we can maintain the trust, as our colleague from Canada, Francois, said this morning, they want to be the most trusted. And how do we maintain that trust while at the same time opening ourselves up to using data?
That's a difficult question.
Yeah.
It can never be a straight line. I mean, in my recent encounter, I have concluded that we can't dance on the floor like this one. We can't dance on the smooth side of the saw to cause action. You've got to dance on the serrated side of the saw. And at times you actually dip your foot into that blade. At times you are, yes. So that's I think the role of the statistician in general, or the future statistician in general, who interacts very intensively with policy. So there's no straight line, it's very, very rugged. But as you do that, you need to have methods, you've got to have standards, so that your observation generates time series. Because whilst observations are true, and pronouncements or our perceptions about those observations are also true. But you need a lens that looks at them across time, consistently over time, in order that to generate time series. So it's not aloofness that will create active citizenry. It's the engagement of citizens with the statistical processes that will generate action. And I think this is where we should be moving towards. It's almost unification, or let me not say unification, but it is that space where politics interact with statistics actively, with citizens seeing the value of the statistics. Those things do not dilute the authenticity and methodological rigor that has to, it only strengthens it. So, a long way by any imagination from where we are now. And with the proliferation of gadgets that citizens actually use around, and then they have their own temperature, they have their own, I mean, I like citizen science, and I think it has to be used because each time we go use statistics questionnaires, we actually ask them about themselves, which is their own diagnosis. Now, when they have these gadgets that collect information, it's almost a similar way. But in many ways, we've got to be consistent in asking those questions so that no one have their own facts. Because that's the problem when people think they can have their own facts. They have their own opinions. But facts get proven over time through time series. So I think active engagement, and that means we've got to have people empowered through learning about these things. The technological issues are resolved. All these other issues are simple, they are resolved. But you need to drive the democratic process of individual rights that do not violate others' rights. You need to make sure that people have access to education and they can count and read and they can understand this unifying language. Without that, many others will be left behind, and citizen science may count for very little.
Yeah, I think this is an important point. I mean, citizen science, it increases citizen engagement and also has the potential to increase the quality of the statistics. So I think, I mean, overall, even though there are a lot of tier 3 indicators on the environment, which is where we've started, it's been a rather positive discussion so far, where we're more talking about opportunities as opposed to the things that are holding us back. So I'm going to hand over to the to you guys to ask the panel, as opposed to me asking the panel.
Thank you, Jillian. Thanks, panelists. Very good, deep information here. I have a couple of questions. One of them is on the data flow. What guides the data flow at the national level for the SDGs? Is it guided by a national framework for SDGs or by strategy? And who maps the data sources at the national level? Is it the statistics who does map that? This is my first question. My second question, the Sustainable Development Indicator, you know, we have them since Rio 1992. And we have 250 indications. What would makes us think that we will have a better chance of implementing the new set of indicators that's coming out of SDGs that are even higher in number than what we had, you know, the 250 since Rio 1992.
Thank you. I'm going to propose that we take 4 questions and then come back to the panel. So just to give you an idea of how I see the flow. All right, Stephen.
Hi, Stephen Lausch from GEO, Group on Earth Observations. I have 1 point and 1 question. 1 point is none of you have used the term analysis-ready data. And analysis-ready data is actually what Australia produced. So the water observations from space is doing all the pre-processing, all of that work. And that is what became the Open Data Cube that Enrique talked about yesterday in the main stage. And I'm currently in the process with Australia of raising about $50 million to build something called Digital Earth Africa, which is all about analysis-ready data for Africa. So I wanted to plug for that, because that's really important, because all of that data will provide more data that will support this process, and it will all be analysis-ready, and it will be open. So that's a big item. But in the, so for disaster-related statistics and stuff, you go to UNISDR and they have all the language. You're talking about a comparator for GDP in the climate area, Gemma?
Environment.
For environment, because there are things where we work, like there's essential climate variables, essential agricultural variables, essential biodiversity variables, where the scientific community from an Earth observation perspective have done a lot of that work, and UNFCCC accepts that work. So I'd be really interested to know how that could inform or support from your perspective, if you've even heard of any of this work. Because I go to these meetings and there's like thousands of people who are not statisticians who sit and talk about this from another perspective.
Okay, Martin Brocklehurst from the Citizen Science Global Partnership. I listened with fascination to some of the areas where you talk about lack of data and lack of people to get the data. There are some fabulous programs that are now emerging in the citizen science community around e-citizen science. This is citizen science that can be done by anybody, anywhere in the world. In Africa and in the Pacific, you have some fantastic environments that people are really interested in. I'll give you one simple example. In Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, where people are looking at the changes in the Great Barrier Reef, 1.5 million data points in under a year from people in and around Australia. Well, as that starts to go wider, people are interested in reefs right across the Pacific. If we can scale up and scale out on some of these programs, you can get amazing support for data for your countries, outside your countries. So don't miss that opportunity of engaging the global community. The second thing is we have fabulous programs operating at national level on citizen science that can get you very large data sets, can help you with a lot of the big data problems that you've got. But what we don't have yet is a business model that allows us to scale up and scale out. So help us to help you to do that. And we can start to fill in many of the data gaps that you've currently got in your systems. Thank you.
Indeed, you covered a lot of interesting issues, such as how to fill the gaps in data and how to deal with big data. But one issue that perhaps has not been looked at is, in order to make this big data machine actionable and as unambiguous as possible, it's important to describe this data precisely and make this data standards compliant. So my question is, since you are working with time series of SDGs, to what extent you're looking at formalization such as time series markup language or similar, the work that comes out of OGC, or perhaps similar models?
Okay, thanks. So we have a wide range of questions. So we're going to do a flash round, and we'll start with Gemma and come my direction. I see you don't have a mic. You can have mine.
All right, so I'm going to do a flash across these 6 questions. So what we have now is what's called Agenda 2030. It is vastly bigger than the 1992 Rio Declaration, which was about environmental sustainability. So you have here environmental, social, economic, population sustainability. That's what's different to 1992. And the SDG indicator, Agenda 2030 is a country-led process working at the global level. So countries have to decide what are the SDGs, first of all, that are a priority to them, what are the targets that are priority to them, what then are the indicators that are priority to those. Many countries, and for instance, let's just take Bhutan. They've decided 3 of the 17 goals are a priority for their government. They're going to look at 3, they're going to look at targets for those 3, and they're going to look for indicators for those 3. That doesn't have to be all 17. Their priority is 3 of them. In most cases that I'm aware of, the National Statistical Office is part of driving this agenda, but coordination systems are being set up in countries. In my experience, they're either being driven out of the Prime Minister's department or they're driven out of the Foreign Affairs and Ministry. So those are the 2 departments or the 2 areas of government in conjunction with the National Stats Office who are driving these initiatives at the local level. They are using analysis-ready data. If you want to use your part of this issue here is that we've all got our own language. So I may not have used the term analysis-ready data, but statisticians will use analysis-ready data, if you want to call it that, or if you want to call it quality-assured data or edited data or whatever. At the end of the day, though, and I unashamedly, I am an official statistician. I've been working in official statistics for 30 years. And the issue here is that with the Agenda 2030 says let's produce trusted statistics, having regard to the fundamental principles of official statistics. I'd highly recommend you go and have a look at what those fundamental principles are. Scientific methods, independent, free of political persuasion, enduring methodologies. So we need to have data sources that are enduring over time. GDP's been around since 1946, I think, something like that, let's say 1950. It's been around for 60, 70 years. So this SDG agenda is about putting in enduring data sources and enduring data statistics. It's not about producing an anecdote that Pali was saying, or it's not about producing a one-time fact that then we don't have next month or we don't have next quarter. We need these enduring systems, and this is where work like the disaster-related statistics framework or the climate-related statistics framework is excellent, because these develop frameworks that the statistical community, working with the geospatial, the earth, the biodiversity community, can then produce statistics on an enduring basis using data that we trust, have scientific sound methodologies behind them, and that then can be shared with the public and made accessible. So that was my traverse of those 6 questions. Just while I do have the mic, I'd just like to say I think one of the best resources we have available for this Agenda 2030 agenda are what I would call our national accountants. National accountants are very good at getting data sources from a variety of different sources and bringing them together into a coherent framework. They work in national economic accounts, but national accountants can also do national environment accounts and so on. So I'm a big fan of the National Accounting Fraternity and bringing their expertise into this area of environmental stats.
Okay, thank you. I will just pick up some questions because I don't have the experience in, for example, in geospatial data and so on. I just want to reflect on the answer to the question of the data flow to SDG at national level. Well, I think that in my view, each country has this own implementation to management to do that. In Luxembourg, what we have done is that we have defined the statistical institute are central points and correspondent from the country. That means that we have the missions to centralize the data and to cleanse the data and answer to question for custodian agency on this topic. We also have the mission to verify the data present in international database. Doesn't mean that we have all the data sources in-house. Sometimes we tend the question or we request data for other ministries, but we are always in the flow of data and question between international and national level. I want also answer to the question on a webinar on the private data, because it's really a problem that we have also in our country. In our case, it's not on spatial data, but it's data coming from smart meters that we have in-house and so on. And this data is, of course, private data. And we do not have access, in fact, on this data. And what we try to do is to implement a legal act to have access to this data.
Great, so I will also just pick up on a few of the different questions. So on the SDG indicators versus the Rio indicators, just to pick up on that from an implementation side a little bit, I think one of the really powerful things we're seeing with the SDGs is the level of ownership across various sectors of society. So with the Rio conventions, a lot of those remain very much within policy circles, within a niche community working on biodiversity-related issues. But with the SDGs, for example, this week we heard that one of the key performance indicators for ministers in the UAE is that they deliver on a specific sustainable development goal. Companies are using it for their annual reporting. So this sort of broad engagement towards the SDGs, these colleagues are working to monitor how that's taking place and how much that's happening, but I think that incredibly diverse engagement is really important. In terms of the analysis-ready data, we would love to work with you as that comes online to figure out how we can network it into the governments that we're working with and ensure that it gets taken up and used as much as possible and figure out how we can build that collaboration. And in terms of the question from Ghana about data openness, I think this is a really key question that we've been having a lot of conversations around here. And there's been a lot of conversations and events leading up to this around how we really create a public-private data commons where we're supporting the development of open data and also supporting data providers so they have the resources they need to develop and maintain these data sources and make them accessible to a wide range of users who are trying to deliver on conservation and sustainable development. So this is through UN Biodiversity Lab, that's part of what we're trying to address in terms of making these key global data sets available based on their original use restrictions and encouraging various data providers to submit where they're able to have them published to this platform, which is accessible on the public side as well. You can access and visualize and run some basic analyses. But I think that question really gets back to this idea of how we're governing data that's produced and analytic tools that are produced for this data, how we're ensuring that it's well funded from core sources of funding and how we get it into the hands of users.
Yes, I think I'll start from the last question that came from Ghana about how private holders of data hoard the data and don't share it. and see a lot of benefit from selling it, in fact. One of the fundamental contradictions that are embedded in that kind of model is that you don't get a lot of money from hoarding data. In fact, you get a lot of resources by distributing it, because it operates on a different economic logic. It's in sharing it that you get returns, because by having it doesn't mean you prevent the other person from having it. So I think we have to understand that data is non-rival in that way. So in economic sense, it's non-rival. Everybody can have it, and the price doesn't go up, it keeps on going lower. And through access and reuse, that's where you make a lot of gains. And I think we have to understand that, and data must be available and free. And on the question of, yes, I think the issue is on formalization, and so that you can generate time series. It is very important, and I link this to citizen science data. Because, I mean, at the basic level, it's Bayesian statistics versus frequencies, and it has to deal with generalizations. And Bayesian statistics is full of biases in it, and you have to deal with those biases and deal with more generalizations which are more policy. And therefore, the argument is not whether an instance didn't occur. The argument is how generalizable is that instance, and how predictable, therefore, is it, given that it occurred. And that's the basic logic between Bayesian statistics and frequencies. And I think that we are seeing increasingly, oh, sorry, what is this now? Somebody's telling me what I have to, how I have to answer. So the issue is the coming together of Bayesian statistics and features, those who are frequentists, which actually dogged the science of statistics for a very long period of time. And we have to now rise to the occasion and deal with statistics in that kind of way. Was going to the last contribution. The question of who sets the priorities, the policymakers set the priorities, and the statisticians do the how part of it. And that's a very important dividing line in terms of the science of information. Those who have interests must be separate from those who actually measure that interest. Otherwise, you corrupt the process. But it doesn't mean that statisticians should not engage with the politicians. It's in the integrity of methods and transparency what is very crucial. And so going forward, in the era of big data and everything, we got to put this matter of integrity of methods at the center of what we do. Otherwise, those who actually collect and control the technology will always benefit from this commons and make sure that they use predictive analytics to further exploit and therefore divide society further.
Thank you. Well, continuing with this topic, the data flow at national level involves, from the pure statistical point of view, the national statistical system. But in terms of the 2030 agenda in general, as Pali was saying, there is a public policy and the national strategy dealing with the whole agenda, and then there is the statistician that are making measurements. However, that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a dialogue among them. In Mexico, we have a national council for the 2030 agenda, which involves the government, local governments, civil society, the academy, and the private sector. So, and we sit in that council as observers. And then we have a committee specialized on SDG indicators. And then we have those agencies that are producing the data, but we keep those in charge of the policy sitting as well in the statistical area. So, there should be a well thought, comprehensive strategy to do that. Now, concerning the 1992, well, I think we should have talked about also thematic follow-up, or in-depth thematic follow-up of the 2030 agenda. Someone told me, someone from UNDP told me that the general indicator framework, the 232 indicators, are are minimalistic expression of the 2030 agenda, because we have one or two actually less than two for each one of the targets. However, there should be more in-depth analysis for each one of the topics or goals or combined goals that need to be addressed. One example is that we have in the region of ECLAC in Latin America, it's called the Montevideo Declaration on Population. So they developed 130 indicators on demography alone. And there may be one for environment, and there should be an in-depth revision for that. And finally, okay, I want to comment on the business model that was mentioned, because at the IAG we have invited the private sector. They are making proposals. We have taken many of them, and we really need to relate. But we keep an ongoing dialogue with the private sector, and they are active participants of the IAG meetings.